Okay. All right, they're coming plentiful. That's great.
All right. We've got a fair few people in now, so we might get started, Mark. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to another Ask the Expert webinar. Today we have Mark, who has prepped a great session for us on resource management and particularly around how you can overcome your current challenges, how you can understand what you actually need to best manage your resources as well. So just before we begin, some small housekeeping.
Oh, Alice?
That would be great.
All right, sorry, you were just gone for a second.
Let me just mute. Yep. Sorry. Yes, if you could all please just remain on mute throughout the session just to minimise distractions, that would be great. But if you do have a question, please feel free to ask away either using the chat or just simply raising your hand, and we would love to engage with you today. All right, so that's all from me. So passing over to you now, Mark.
Thank you so much, Alice. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Well, today is all about resource management, and I want to start with the first sentence. Resource management is not easy. It's hard. And no matter what kind of process and tool you use, it will always have a certain amount of difficulty because things change, and they change all the time. For us, the big question is, how do we want to ensure that we have a firm understanding of resources, no matter what type of work they ultimately do? So the takeaways for today is really resource management the modern way. And when I talk about the modern way, it is very much the traditional, the agile or the hybrid way. And how can we actually ensure that resources can be managed accordingly? How can we overcome our resource management challenges of today? Of course, understanding what we actually need. Resource management is not just resource management. And then also, last but not least, I want to make sure that we understand how we can allocate work across your agile and your traditional projects, as well as, well, work in general, which is not just project management work. So the term of resource management really ultimately means that we have the most effective way to utilize our resource pool. Many organizations have resources, of course, as their main capital, conducting work, doing all of the wonderful work that we need to do every day in life. So with that in mind, I'd like to have a couple of surveys that we prepared and like you to check out the service that is just about to come in front of you. What are your top 3 resource management issues today? Please note, you do have the ability to choose 3 different answers, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the results are. So please, don't be shy, and let's see what what we have. All right, we're just gonna wait a little bit longer. All right, and I can see the responses on the screen. I hope you can see that as well once you submitted it. So clearly there are some, there are some top runners. Okay, we get some more information in. Well, no visibility of our staff, quite expectedly, is one of the main challenges that we face because we don't have that overarching view of our resources. Followed by no accountability for resource requests. We hear that quite often as well, where you require a resource, but you don't really know how to request those, and you don't really know whether these resources are actually coming to your work. And then we have here the continuous overwork. Well, I call it the burnout because of that lack of planning. Yeah, and looking at those challenges that you've just outlined, yeah, we can see this in our field as well. When we think about organizations that we work with that require the resource management capability, well, resource ownership being one of the top priorities, meaning that we need to be able to go to to someone and need to be sure that we actually get the resource when we need it. Non-trusted current workload forecast is another one of those where we have lots of work in the pipeline and we anticipate to utilize and conduct all of that work, but realize that there are actually not enough resources. As we've already outlined, lack of resource visibility, that overarching view of our resources across the organization and what kind of availability they have, what kind of capacity they have, whether they're over or underutilized. Therefore, of course, we have the issue of a constant, well, I call it firefighting mode. So not so much the view ahead, but actually the view in today or into the past, ensuring that we actually need to keep up with the work that we are planning. And therefore, of course, we hear this all the time. Well, we don't have enough time. We have so much work in the pipeline, but we don't know when to achieve all of that. And then, of course, in most cases, resource management in some form happens, on a spreadsheet. Mostly, of course, everything is done manually, really increasing the time of managing resources, trying to manually consolidate that and trying to get that overarching picture is the big challenge that we see in our customers' organizations. Well, the second survey that we're just about to show is, well, in regards to prioritization, when it comes to resource management in your organization, what would you think is the top prioritization for you when it comes, to resource visibility, resource optimization, long-term resource capacity planning, or understanding what work has actually been completed? What kind of top priority do you see right now? And if you could please fill in the survey, that would be awesome. And it's coming plentiful. I can see that 14 responses, but we have more people, 23. There we go. And it increases. And there is a head-to-head race between resource visibility, resource optimization, and also long-term resource capacity planning. I'll talk about capacity planning in a moment. Of course, capacity planning for us means long-term planning in regards to what kind of resources we need. But as you can see, the top challenges are quite similar across all of the organizations. And, we see a very similar picture. So when we look at that, organizations, when it comes to the reasons for resource management, number one, resource visibility, ensuring that I know what's going on. And then the work and resource optimization. All too often do we see resources needing to conduct manual work and trying to find the optimal way of automation is actually super important because it ultimately makes us more efficient when it comes to conducting work. We already saw resource capacity planning. I referred to resource capacity planning as the long-term planning picture, the ability for us to know what kind of resources we may need, what kind of FTE counts we may need to increase or may even decrease for what it's worth. When we are thinking about short-term resource planning and execution, it really is the ability for us to distribute the work so that we can plan not only the work, but also the resources optimal. Of course, ultimately, the reason for resource management is to eliminate the burnout effect that we have when we feel overwhelmed with the work of each individual staff member. And look, because resources are a very big cost factor of an organization, that is actually one of the levers to ensure that we increase the business value, and this can happen through different ways. Optimization of the resources I already mentioned is of course key here, ensuring that we allow staff members to work on the highest priorities and the biggest value of the company. So these are generally the reasons for resource management as such. We have one of the other. I'll just see that there is another very good comment here. One of the other reasons for resource management challenges is we have is resource capability management and planning. And yes, that's a very good point. Thanks for raising that, Steve. Well, we do want to make sure that we have the right skill set to the right resource as well. Otherwise, we can't really determine what type of role we need to fulfill. Excellent. So I do have another one of those wonderful surveys that I would like you to fill in. We've been talking about the challenges and we've been talking about the resource management reasons. And I'm sure everybody has those challenges and reasons in your organization, but what kind of tool do you ultimately use to manage your entire resource pool? That is a very good question. And if you could fill in the responses, that would be awesome. I am seeing there is also a bit of a head-to-head racing, obviously, between some of the organizations that already have a resource and PPM management capability. MS Project being mentioned, of course, some in-house build solution Project Online, which is good to see, which actually goes hand in hand with the Excel spreadsheet, which in our experience is actually the first tool of choice when it comes to resource management. We all love Excel, and I just want to very quickly point out the positive parts of Excel, but predominantly the negative parts of Excel. And I think if you don't have a tool already today, you will find that Excel is really limiting the capability for us. So when I look at the problems with Excel when it comes to resource management, and I remember when we started in Excel as well. If you have a small resource pool, it kind of makes sense. It's quite informal. You can have conversations and then just simply fill in the Excel spreadsheets. However, lack of standards, it's very individual, is very prominent, especially if you have different departments that have different Excel spreadsheet. It's very manual, of course, and static. It can't really change in accordance to the model that you have. Yes, easy to break formulas and calculations, of course. No dynamic visibility of resource capacity, especially when you add new headcounts. You need to make sure that you keep the Excel spreadsheet at hand. Time consuming when things change, and not only when things change. Planning is one thing, but planning also means that we need to understand what we've actually done so that we also know what still needs to happen. Trying to manage that in Excel is a difficult task. And what we see quite often when it comes to information that is not trustworthy, the disconnectedness from the work that you actually conduct, whether this is project work or whether this is business as usual work. Visibility and insights for overall reporting, again, especially if you have different Excel spreadsheets, trying to merge them together is difficult. But most importantly, capacity planning is a difficult task, and therefore for strategic alignment of your projects in comparison to your resources can be very cumbersome. Now, I just want to quickly open up the floor to see whether there's some feedback on some of the tools and your challenges. If you have Excel, for example, what works for you and what doesn't work for you in that sense. It allows me to quickly sip my coffee, and please don't be shy. Open up your voices and give us a bit of feedback. Okay. So I would assume that most of you then use Project Online or MS Project, but we do know that some of you, of course, use Excel. Clearly, an area that we discourage from using. I know it's always easy to go back quickly and revert quickly to Excel if we are frustrated with the solution in its own right. We have issues around visibility of employees and contractors availability. Yeah, look, especially when you work with contractors as well. How do you ensure that your contractor is fully utilized and compare them to your full-time staff? Yeah, I can see those challenges arise as well. All right.
Mark, I also think that Excel is utilized by more citizen project managers because they're familiar with it. They've been brought in on a project. They don't actually have the time to upskill around the ins and outs of others. And that's where I find that default is typically that Excel for those types of PMs.
Definitely. Look, I see that and hear that as well. The ease of use, again, is actually the big advantage that Excel has always had. We've all grown up with Excel and can't imagine a life without it. And that ease of use can sometimes be quite, quite challenging when we are thinking about the bigger picture. So yes, intuitivity of resource management is really key, ensuring that people have an easy way to request resources and allocate them as well. I hope that I can show you a couple of examples of how you can actually overcome those in the beautiful world of Excel. All right. Now, we've been talking about general issues about resource management, and we put this resource management in that big bubble statement saying resource management. But you know what? It's like saying, hey, I want to buy a car, and we know that a car is not just equal a car. Well, as much as resource management is not equal resource management. Before we start the endeavor of managing resources, I think we need to understand what kind of needs we have, and in the challenges and in the top priorities that we've seen in the survey, we already outlined some of that. So in a general sentence, when we are talking about resource planning or resource management, we think about historical value. So what have I actually done? We think about near-term needs. Hey, I need to make sure that this particular task is fulfilled by next week by a particular resource. And of course, we have that long-term planning of capacity. How many FTEs do I need? Now, just so that we talk about that terminology, capacity planning for us really is that long-term forecast based on high-level numbers. And these high-level numbers are going far into the distance quite often, 2-3 years. The further you try to predict the future, of course, the less accurate it becomes, the more high level you need to think about. So capturing that data from a pure data perspective really means that we need to determine how many FTEs we want to have, so high level data, which is still quite challenging, of course, but from a maintenance of the data, it is not something that I need to continuously maintain on a weekly basis. Well, then, of course, we have the concept of what we refer to as a resource allocation. So on one hand, we know how much planning we need from a capacity perspective, but on the other hand, we then need to be able to allocate our resource to work, and resource management and work will always go hand in hand. You cannot do resource management without knowing what type of work you have, and these could involve project work or BAU work. Now, when I refer to that resource management from a resource allocation perspective, I talk about planned work that we are planning to do, not actual work, which is something else, but really this is that forward planning of the resource allocation. Well, and then when we bring this down further and I start a project, I then need to be in the ability to, I then need to have the ability to actually distribute these resources into different tasks and actions. And that's really where team management comes into place, really breaking it down, making sure that all of the tasks that we need to fulfill in order to complete our project, that they are conducted in a way that makes logical sense, and allocating resources, especially in the agile and in the traditional form or hybrid form these days, makes it actually quite difficult, because task assignments in something like MS Project, where you have your traditional waterfall capability, is a time-phased part where you can say, hey, I want this resource, this task takes 100 hours, I want this resource to be allocated, and then you know the amount of duration. But if you think about it from an agile way, sorry, there are very loud birds around here. If you think about it from an agile way and from a Kanban way, you don't have that time-phased part. I will talk a little bit more about those work items and recommendations of how you can actually conduct those different works. But really, team management is the more detailed capability. Well, and then we also need to understand the resource tracking or work tracking for that matter. Which resource has done what type of task, so the actual work, and how much longer does that resource actually think they need in order to complete this particular task. That's what task tracking is all about. Well, and then we have work management, which I see as my personal work management, the ability for me to have an overarching view across all of the work that is assigned to me, with the ability to prioritize that work so that I can get through my workload, understanding where I am, and therefore hopefully also reduce, if not eliminate, that burnout factor. Now, when we think at that resource management level and near term and long term, the maintenance of the data is actually what most organizations are tripping over. So if you think about that, let's have a look in those numbers. Well, capacity planning really is a total FTE per year or per particular period, quite high level, as I mentioned earlier, in comparison to resource allocation, where I really need to know the total amount of the hours or days spent for a work item per resource. So literally the allocation of the amount of hours to a particular piece of work. In my instance, I'm just going to call that to a project. The team management then really starts to talk about assignment, and you will see the terminology of allocation versus assignment is a different one. Allocation ultimately means, could you just mute yourself, please? Thank you. Allocation really means I allocate the work to a project, so really a top-down, whereby assignment means I'm going to assign the task to the resource. This, by the way, is the most granular way of managing resources. For those of you who use MS Project, and I know we saw in the survey that many use as well as Project Online, that bottom-up way of assigning resources to tasks to then determine the total requirements is what we refer to the bottom-up approach. A lot of organizations, however, need to have that top-down approach where I can say, hey, I need a developer for the next 3 months, or I need a business analyst for the next 2 weeks. How I then actually distribute that type of work will be done through the assignment. Well, and then resource tracking. I know we all hate that. We all want to have the information about, hey, what have you done? But on the other hand, every single resource seems to dislike managing actual works and timesheets. But of course, that is the purpose of a timesheet, not only to determine how many hours have I worked, but also what type of work have I conducted throughout that work. Ideally, you want to be in a position to do this on an assignment level, on a task by task level. However, we have many organizations that are not so much interested in actual work against tasks, which is more sort of a project management requirements. They are more interested in resources against the project so that I can allocate either funds or costs to that particular project. Well, and then work management, as I mentioned already, really the to-do list of all of my assigned work items. Look, especially when you work with different execution tools, with Jira versus with MS Project versus with DevOps, versus with Project for the Web. I, as the individual team member who may be assigned to 4 different projects with 4 different execution tools, will make it very difficult for me to have that to-do list. So when we're talking about numbers, we also need to understand what kind of formulas do we actually use in the resource management space. Well, capacity is, of course, a very common word. It's the total amount of time at work. It means I, as Mark, would have a daily capacity, let's say, of 8 hours. That's how much time I am, I'm spending at work. In comparison to the utilization, which is the total amount of the allocated time for work. So really, how much time have I of my capacity? Have I I bet that there was right now a lot of people having heart palpitations because I was gone for a second. Can you still hear me? Can you hear me again?
Yes,
Yeah.
all good now, Mark.
Yeah. Sorry. Welcome to the wonderful world of the internet. So I hope you still can see my screen. So really availability on the other hand then of course means the total amount of time that we are still available at work. So the utilization or the assigned work against the capacity allows us to calculate the availability, and of course with that most of the times in organizations is also the wonderful over allocation, which is the demon on our shoulder of burnout. Over allocating work really means that people are generally in stress, and we want to of course avoid that and balancing that out. So really when we're looking at numbers, I wanted to make sure that we understand what it is we are calculating, because based on that you then have the ability to calculate more. You can then say, okay, total amount of time allocated to the resources times the rate of the resources gives me the cost of a particular project, for example. Not to mention, sell out rate, charge out rates, all of these wonderful things actually can easily derive from those kinds of numbers. All right, so this was really just a general overview of what resource management means, and we can see that resource management really doesn't mean it's equal resource management. Ultimately, it's the time spent, the effort against the timeline, the duration that we want to outline. All right, so we've been talking about resource management not being equal resource management. Well, at the same time, work is not equal work. And I'm sure you appreciate that, especially when you work in an environment where you don't have just dedicated resources working on projects, or you may not have an agile team that does nothing else but working on a particular product. You have a combination, and really the combination on one hand is the project work, so traditional work versus the agile work in comparison to your business as usual work, where we have operational work that just needs to be conducted. This could include, well, that does include, of course, non-project time, which could be, I don't know, ticketing, could be, patching, all of those things that we actually need to keep in mind and need to be able to manage, because it's not just projects that manage resources, it is the entire work. Now, in order for us to determine that entire work, though, we also need to understand non-working time of our resources. All too often do I see team leads that may have 10 FTEs that they're in charge of. Well, if you think about it, with all of the non-working time, meaning holidays and sick days, etc., the FTEs is not 10, but it's generally 8.5, and we need to understand that. Otherwise, we are predicting into a future where resources are actually not available. So really, work is not equal work, and therefore we need to make sure that we understand, for us in our term, it is actually the planned work that we need to manage. That also means if you have business as usual work that you don't plan ahead, well, that makes it really difficult for us to incorporate that into the resource management. So resource management generally tries to look ahead, hence the reason why we need to make sure that we have planned work. All right, now based on the session that we are having here, the first half was really all about resource management, understanding what type of resources we need to manage, and to what extent and to what granularity. The second part is really, well, how are we ensuring that the work that we have, that is so different at times, how can we allocate that across a resource pool? Agile, traditional, or hybrid, all the same? Well, let's see whether this is all the same. I'm going to ask you a question, and I would ask you to fill in the survey. Do you work in a waterfall, in an agile, or in a hybrid environment? Oh yes, and of course, we don't manage our resources, but I hope that this will be a 0%. Otherwise, you kind of miss the reason why we are here. Interesting. So I can see, based on the responses, a very, very big winner of hybrid, between waterfall and agile. That's super interesting. If I would have asked that question 3 years ago, people would have said, agile? What's that? So you can see that, the industry that we are living in vastly changes because of the ability for us to actually apply a process of Agile to it. So 83% have a hybrid, 15 a waterfall, and only 2% actually live in a pure Agile environment. I would assume that the waterfall environment is for very particular industries, building industries, utilities. So everything where you need to actually have the design and the planning stage in front before you can execute, in comparison to Agile, where we try to create a backlog of work, try to prioritize them to the highest value, and then distribute them on a sprint by sprint basis to our team. So thank you for the feedback. Now I'm going to ask an open question and hope that that you can respond to that. Now, in those hybrid environments, what would you say right now is your main challenge when it comes to managing resources in that hybrid environment? What's your take on that? Don't be shy. I'm going to sip my coffee. That.
Mark, I think for us it's around the balance between allocation of resources to prioritise projects, and whether those resources are in a shared pool or are dedicated to particular parts of the business.
You know what, Jenna, this is actually the ultimate question when it comes to Agile or hybrid environment. Because when you think about it, a traditional project is very much project focused, meaning I need to fulfill those tasks in order to complete my project. But in an Agile environment, Agile is actually very team focused, where I have generally a dedicated team of people that work in continuous sprints, continuously trying to build something new or trying to fulfill a particular project. So yeah, I can very much see that, because if you have a resource pool that is an open resource pool, and and a particular staff member would work, I don't know, half a day on a waterfall project and then half a day on an Agile project, that must be quite difficult. So yeah, I can very much see that this is a big issue. Changing priorities, Carrie, yes, of course. Changing, and with my opening statement, remember at the start I said resource management will never be easy because it continuously changes. Well, priority changing all the time. This could be on a resource level where I say, hey, Ryan is sick today, so I need to find someone else because that is super important. Or we are working on a particular piece of work or project where it has suddenly either increased or decreased in its priority, so therefore we can redistribute our project resources. Yeah, I get that. No ability to manage resources in an Agile way, but this is the wish and expectation. Yes, and I will promise you, I will actually, Tanya, I will show you how we have the ability these days through digitalization to ensure that we allocate the right resource. Now, the assignment is a different part, and in the Agile world, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a list of tasks, but we may have story points, but we don't really have the effort and the duration that it takes to complete that task. We always try to create the tasks in form of sprints so that a task doesn't take longer than sprints. So yes, I can see that the expectation is there, or the wish is there. However, if you look under the hood, that's actually the difficult part. Tracking progress to report in a waterfall way to senior managers when team works in an Agile way and priority of work changes. Oh my God, Carol, you are so true and so right. And it is often a misperception that when you work in an Agile environment, that you have a set scope and a set cost. Well, that's counteractive to what Agile actually is supposed to do. The ability for me to reprioritize at the same time also means that it is sometimes difficult to report a continuous progress of the project. However, there are ways how you can do that. You can actually report on sprints, and you can report on completed task, a task burn down, for example, or you could even report against, I'm going to say the story points in comparison to all the story points that are still in the backlog. But as you quite rightly pointed out, that the backlog in an agile environment is not set in stone. It continuously changes. So we always need to find that initial baseline and understand what has been put on top of that backlog. It's a big issue in a hybrid environment all the time, because executives expect, I want to know time, budget, deliverables, whereby the Agile actually allows us to say, hey, these are the highest priorities, and we work our way down as long as we think that's feasible. Clarity within our team of how different tools should be used for different types of projects. Oh my God, look, Trudy, yes, and I will show you that the industry that we are in right now, project portfolio management, has really changed in the last three years dramatically, 3 to 5 years, because of the introduction of Agile. I remember, having the feeling that I've been in that industry for 260 years right now, having lost all my hair. We used to, in the past, try to increase the project management maturity model across the board. Well, that never worked. It always failed, because an organization cannot have, or very few organizations can only have, a combined project management maturity model. That's because different departments have different purposes. Departments are not there to manage projects. So therefore, the industry today refers to what we call adaptive project management. So what that means is we provide users with the ability to use the tools of their choice. So in an agile environment, you do want to use your Jira, and you do want to use your Azure DevOps, or you may even want to use your Planner or your Trello data for a Kanban reason, because that's the way how you meant to manage them. On the other hand, very strict project managers want to be able to predict the futures, construction, etc. We want to be able to ensure that that's the case. So providing the resources with the right tool set is actually the secret of success to providing a 100% user adoption rate in managing your projects consistently and trustworthy. Yeah, very good feedback. And Jamie, resource ownership, responsibility for assigned versus responsibility for resource demand. Yeah, and there are different roles. You have team leads and you have resource managers, you have departmental head information. It all comes sort of into a whole bunch of different channels. I will show you how you can actually overcome that, because there needs to be a direct responsibility towards a resource that I request, and that is generally the team lead, because the responsibility of the team lead is to balance out that work. But yeah, I can see that resource ownership, we see this all the time. That was the reason why this is one of the top challenges here as well. Strategy view, overall estimates for future pipeline for proper planning and future resource employment. Yeah, Richard, that is true. Pipeline planning is always high level, so therefore you need to be able to provide high level figures and high level approaches, but what's more important is you need to be able to refine this pipeline as it comes further into the approval. And that's really a process that needs to be introduced, because you can lose a lot of money if you go down the wrong strategy path. Practical current pipeline, the ability to shift and prioritize work, we've already mentioned that, and to address immediate actual allocation and reallocation of work. Hey, only because I plan Ryan to work next week at a particular project doesn't necessarily mean that he actually does that on the day because of that priority. Look, I can see there are lots of feedback here, which is wonderful, and I'll go in the Q&A space. I'll go a little bit further to that, but clearly, this is the resource management challenge of the 21st century, the ability for us to utilize waterfall versus agile versus BAU work. So how does that actually work? Okay, so how to resource manage in a hybrid environment. Let's have a look at that, because 83% of you actually start to go down this path. Again, in my world, we always have to differentiate in the resource management world between resources and between work. these are merit. You can't just have resources without work, because in order for you to manage resources, you need to in some form allocate that. So what we are seeing is super successful these days is really the allocation and commitment that needs to happen. How does that work? Well, a project manager or a BAU manager or any other resource request person is actually requesting the resource. And this can be a super easy model. Again, I'll show you in a demonstration right now in a second how we actually handle that. But that resource request needs to be, I'm going to call it an Excel-like experience. Why do I say that? Well, it was already made before in one of the comments. A citizen project manager doesn't know how to use a schedule and doesn't feel doesn't know what assignments are and leveling and all of those things. So therefore, it is always referred back to Excel. So we really want to ensure that we provide that intuitivity in that resource request. Well, then of course the resource manager receives that resource request and now commits resources by approving those resources to the project manager, allocating them to the work and the project, and therefore you then have this approved project team. That means, I've got a bucket, put all my resources in, close that bucket, they are mine, and I can now start feeding them with work. In the most pragmatic way, in our world, we see that being the most successful way, because if you do it bottom up, you really need to be schedule rigor. And I'm sure all of you on this call agree that schedule rigor is, well, it's difficult, right? Because we do have citizen project managers. We do have SMEs who do not know schedules. And I'm sure I have people here on the phone, on the call that don't have schedules actually at all for some of the projects. So we really need to ensure that we understand that. Now, once we have allocated and committed the resource, it is then up to the project manager to assign these resources and distribute those resources, the tasks that we expect them to do. You may have done that beforehand to determine your allocation. That makes it much easier. But ultimately, it's now up to the project manager to do the magic of project management, saying, hey, Joe, you do this, Ryan, you do this, Mark, you do this, and together we will bring that over. And how you do that from a schedule is actually, I'm not going to say secondary, it is dependent on the type of project. So we do have, departments that are quite happy just allocating plans, tasks in the planner to a resource, and that's all they need to have. Others use Project Online, Project for the Web, Jira DevOps, so really combining any kind of execution tool together, because the commonality of those execution tools is the task. What kind of task needs to happen? Now, what we then do with the task, create dependencies or put them into a sprint or allocate story points or effort to that, is then actually up to the individual project and the individual project manager and team. And that's super important. I like to refer to that as the difference between the top-down allocation versus the bottom-up assignment of the resources. Now, they do need to align, and we actually have the ability to compare both, and I'll show you that in a second, so that we can ensure that the time that was allocated to the resource is used in the most effective way. All right, so that's the concept about resource allocation versus resource assignments, committing resources to my work and then distributing those work items on a team's basis. Excuse me. All right, now, okay. All right, perfect. Before I do my demo, though, is there any other feedback that you may have when it comes to the allocation of resources, or the difference between allocation versus assignment? Does that all sort of resonate with you?
Mark, it does for me. I think there's another element too to consider, which is around the actual resource. It's themselves and the management and progress of that task, because I think that feeds back into the resource management, because very few resources that we'd have would only be working on just one project. So, conceptually, it sounds all good around allocation and commitment, and then you assign the tasks. But then sequencing and schedule slippage, etc. The individual resource themselves also needs to work. So I think there's also another next level within the project execution that needs to come through.
Oh, Shana, again, yes, definitely. Very, very good feedback, and fully agree. Only because we plan something doesn't mean we execute the same way. Well, most projects are actually not executed exactly as they're planned. So therefore, the rigor for us to continuously managing tasks on one hand needs to be there, as well as ensuring that we have the resource pool available for us, especially in large organizations. If a project slips, well, it ultimately is not only that project that slips, it is actually all of the subsequent projects where the resources were assigned to afterwards that slip as well. Communication, resource meetings will not be eliminated only because you have a digital capability of visibility of your resources and managing your resources. So yes, very good feedback. Thank you. Okay, so let me show you what we recommend when we're talking about a hybrid environment. Actually, before I do that, I just want to show you the case scenario that we're going to go through. Again, project manager resource request, resource approval. There are actually a couple of different case scenarios. I call it the formal request versus the meeting and allocation, especially smaller teams. They meet weekly. Project manager, resource manager agrees to those and then just simply updates the information in comparison to larger organizations where I actually need to create that resource request and send that over. The part that I'm about to show you is really that allocation and commitment. So I'll start as a project manager and then work my way into the resource management, just so that you see that too. All right. So what you see here right now is nothing else but in our world, SenseiIQ, where we manage all of our project programs, portfolios, and resources as well. Now, as you can see, when I look at my resources, we do actually have the ability to seamlessly integrate all execution tools that you have in your environment. We also have our own execution tool that is built on Microsoft Power Apps, especially for lightweight projects. So for users that don't have a schedule or execution tool, that is actually very helpful. So as you can see, here's a list of all of my projects with all of my KPIs. I can easily mouse over and can actually very easily determine certain, progress updates as well as certain KPIs. And you can also see that some projects are managed in Project Online, other projects are managed in Project for the Web. Here's one in DevOps, and here's one in Jira. So the way that we would request those resources, let me just go into this Cactus drone package delivery software project. When I drill into this project now as a project manager, I have the ability to manage all of my artifacts. One of these artifacts are, of course, my resources. And as you can see, my stage gate approvals with my checklists and everything is part of that. And I have that magic button here that says resources. Well, here is nothing else, but I'm going to call it a Excel spreadsheet. In that instance, I need, let's call him a DBA, a database developer, a generic resource that I'm going to allocate to my project. And let's say I need a business analyst. So you can see the roles are super important, and the mapping to the roles will ultimately also determine, of course, the skill set. It was earlier mentioned, hey, you need to make sure that you assign the right person to the right skill sets. And what we have here now is either a monthly view. You could have that on a weekly basis. If you're a control freak, you could do it on a daily basis. I'm not saying control freak negatively. There are industries where they do this on a daily basis, lawyers, etc., where this is their capital, of course. So in my instance, I want to allocate my resources on a monthly basis just to keep it easier. And I've got my proposed hours, I've got my committed hours, and I've got my availability. Now, as a project manager, I may not be interested in my availability, and I'm just going to take that out and now say, hey, I think according to my schedule or according to my workload, I need 40 hours worth of a DBA and another 40 hours and another 40 hours and another 40 hours. So literally an Excel-like experience. Same with business analyst. Well, business analyst I need for 60 hours per month because they need to analyze my business. And what I've done now as a project manager is super simple. I allocated, in that instance, generic resources. It doesn't have to be, by the way. I could say, hey, I would like, I would like Alain as part of my, pool as well. And it recognizes that Alain is actually a DBA and therefore allocates them to that DBA. And I could now say, well, because Alain has actually worked on this project, I need him to hand it over to the new resource manager, to the new resource. So I'm just going to allocate 20 hours to that. And that's really all I need to do. I now submit all of these requests to my resource manager, which in turn, of course, sends notification, does all of that magic of communication. And I, as a project manager, now need to wait. I may be able to, to add particular comments to this, so that I can communicate to my, to my resource manager. I need Alan to hand over, please. Give him to me. And of course, add that to my part. And look, I may even need him a little bit longer here, and have now just added another 10 hours for next month just to check. All right, so this is literally the way that a project manager now has the ability to work, to request those resources. By the way, this project has, as you can see, an Agile or a Jira project associated to that. Let me just quickly open that up so that you can see that, where I just literally started. Oh, great. Sorry, where I just literally started. There we go. Thank you. Where I literally started to create my backlog, my sprint plan, my board, my Kanban board. So doing all the magic that that I can make happen here. So Agile board, Jira. This is right now the project where my entire team will just simply work with the to-do progress and done. Of course, these tasks are translated directly into the project as well. We do the task synchronization, and as you can see, I can actually also have my my tasks that I manage in Jira right now also in project in SenseiIQ, in progress. When I compare that to the task here in progress, okay, this one I actually moved back half an hour ago. It takes always a couple of minutes until this refreshes. So this is the part of the project manager when it comes to resource requests. Now, how does that look from a resource management perspective or from a team member? Well, first of all, I want to go into the resource demand, and these are now all of the resources that are currently, all of the projects that are currently requesting resources that I'm in charge of. So I can see a project view, I can see this other one here, Alain, and I can see my tenant renewal project here. Do you remember the other project that we had? Let me just quickly, I must have allocated the DBA, and that is actually not my, I'm not the lines manager for that, but of course I can just simply add them to it, and now should have all of these, all of these resources available. Yeah, here's my mobile app, and here's the Cactus Home project that I've just done. So as you can see, this is either a project view, but look, I can also make sure that I have this as a resource view, because I want to know, well, how many DBAs do I currently need? And when I break them down, I can actually see, oh, look, there's actually a DBA required for those projects. There's that comment. Let me have a look at that comment. Hey, can I have Tina, please? Okay. Let me have a look whether I can do that. And as a resource manager, what I do is I'm going to add my resources. And now I can actually see all of the resources with their total availability for the time frame that I have been selecting. In that instance, it's a 12-month time frame. And I can see whether is Tina available. Let me have a look. Oh, look, Tina is actually, yeah, she's available, no problem. I'm going to assign her to that. And look what the system now done is actually automatically allocated or committed the proposed work based on the availability that she has. Of course, I have the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to only give her 30 hours here, but I'll give her therefore 50 hours there. The total amount, of course, is still, fulfilled. It just means that I now have distributed 10 hours into different months. So this is how easy it can be to submit, to approve those resources. Now, let me just quickly go back to the project that I've just done earlier, which is this cactus drone here. And as you can see, on one hand, I've got my business analyst. Who do I have available as business analyst? Let me have a look. Oh, look, Amy. Amy has enough time available, so I'm going to allocate her to that business analyst. My DBA, well, I already know that I need to have Alan to, to do that. And at the same time, look, I've got Albert here available as well. So I'm going to allocate Albert to my project as the DBA, and at the same time I'm actually going to approve, I'm actually going to approve the 20 hours of Alan and the 10 hours for that particular project. And I have now approved the resource allocation. I'm going to say approve all and save, which now of course again turns back to the project manager and gets a notification, and when the project manager is in there, we then have the ability to to see who has been allocated or not. So in that instance, let me just quickly go into this project again, just so that we have that. Oh, which one was it? The cactus drone. There we go. Thank you. So here, thanks, Peter. So here again, when I go into my resources, this is the one that I've just approved. Of course, as a project manager, I can see, hey, all of my resources have been approved. Great. So that really outlines an almost Excel-like allocation, and you will see no matter whether you have Agile or whether you have waterfall work, it actually allows you to do that. That of course gives you then all of the visibility that you need, your resource availability across different departments, because we are managing that. Let's say, what is my IT department right now? Okay, there's still a lot of capacity available. I can see all of my requests, for example. I can see that, oh, look, there's actually a resource that is completely over allocated, and you can see the trend that this is actually a resource that is always required. So it's a very important resource in comparison to others that may not have those kinds of allocation. And there's a whole bunch of other visualizations in there that allow us to determine the capacity planning and also the assigned work of those resources. Again, I could go a little bit more into detail, but I'm conscious of time. I only have 4 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that that you see how this approach actually works in the real world by allocating resources across all of those different types of projects and BAU work as well. So the demo was there. Just one closing statement before I open. Before I open up for questions is. Sorry. There we go. And this is really the second part to this session: resource management maturity, ambition versus reality. I like to call it. What we've just seen looks easy, right? It's too easy, no problem at all. But please be aware, in order for you to go down this path and do that journey, there are certain steps that you need to take. We refer to that as the resource management maturity. Assess whether you're ready for that. Understand what you are doing right now. Understand your current environment and the type of work that you need to plan. Build a resource management roadmap so that you know where you ultimately want to end up, and define your resource process first before you start dealing with with Excel or any other tools. Tools are only the enabler, and they are generally automate the process, and that's key. So please watch that space. Managing maturity model will follow shortly. I think it has already been mentioned there. So I know through 2 more minutes now before I go into the questions here. Are there any other questions that you may want to have answered urgently right now? Now I can see that there are some questions in the chat box. We will of course provide you not only the recording but also the answers to the questions that you have. Some of them have been pre-submitted. Any tips for including non-project activities in resource pictures to provide a view of complete organization capability? Yes. What you do is you essentially create a business as usual item where you plan the work that you need to do ahead. As always, the important part is planning ahead. Are there Excel templates for resource planning? Oodles. Just Google resource management, Excel planning. But honestly, if you want to do true valuable resource management, you may want to bypass that. How to track resources in your reports, dashboards that originate from Planner? Well, I've just showed you that we just seamlessly integrate them, especially Project for the Web and Project Online, and we do that through IQ. How many organizations track internal staff time on projects with timesheets? Well, we do that, of course, because timesheets are super important for us, but we actually have quite a few organizations that utilize staff and timesheet. They do this for cost distribution so that they know how to on-charge work from other departments. We have good control in ITS, that's great, but seeking to get other delivery arms to register time spent, and that's really hard, I can imagine. Our challenges in recording this effort is a measure of organizational cost in delivering the project worth the reward. Yes, I would say if you have a big team with big variations. Now, if you have a team where you can say, well, generally 20% goes over to this and 30% goes over to that, that may well do the trick. You really have to do the calculations of whether it is worth, because the variations of those work items are always in flux. I personally like tracking actuals because it does allow me ultimately to to see what still needs to be accomplished. Now, I know that was a super quick verbal wind at the end. I think it was important that we actually went through the concept of resource management and then how we apply that. Just next steps, you will see today's webinar recording will be sent out shortly with some collateral, of course. Please stay connected to us. You can follow the link when we send you the collateral. And yeah, I'd love to have some feedback. Especially, look, an hour is never enough for resource management. Give me some of your challenges that we can outline and that we can focus on in the next Ask the Expert session. And with that, I would like to thank you very much and have an awesome day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Mark. Bye.